So you want to start reading fantasy, but you don't know where to begin? Well, good, because that's my responsibility to tell you exactly where to begin. And believe me when I tell you, I'm going to get you so immersed in this fantasy genre that you probably will never be able to get yourself out of it. So for me, I think the best way to get started in fantasy, to open up those taste buds, is to start with shorter, more digestible stories, or even short and digestible series. I've seen other people do videos like this, and they often suggest these giant books from giant series, and I actually think that misses the point. While those stories are amazing to sink your teeth into and really engross you in their world, I think that that's going to scare a lot of people off, and I ain't about to do that to you. I want to give you an entry point for all sorts of different styles of readers, and I just think that's going to give you guys a chance to find something that suits your style of reading, and that will dictate which direction you take your reading journey. That's how I want to hit this video. And if you happen to be an experienced reader, don't worry, you're going to enjoy all these books as well, because they are some of the best. All right, let's get into it. So for anybody who's looking for a light-hearted, low-commitment start, I would suggest either The Rhythmatist or Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Both of these books at the moment are standalones, but they are both potentially going to turn into series, but that doesn't matter because you can actually read them completely satisfyingly as a standalone. They wrap up really, really nicely. Now, The Rhythmatist is a really, really short book. It's a really easy read, very easy to get your head around, and it's really, really appropriate for young A audience, like the young adults, teenage audience. And I actually read this book about 120 pages in a row without even realizing it. I only realized when my eyes started to burn because I was so engrossed with the story. Even though it's not very complex, it was really fun, really engaging. While Warbreaker is still a really easy read, but it's a more engaging story with a more realized, well-established magic system, which is beautiful, by the way, very easy to visualize, very, very engaging. And the overall story of Warbreaker is a lot more mysterious, which is a really nice bonus. All right, next up, for those who like a grittier, darker story and still a standalone, I like Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Ninth House has much darker themes than the other books I've mentioned so far, and it also is set in Yale University, which makes it low fantasy, which means that the world is still magical, but it's kind of set in a world we already know, which is great for new readers or people new to the genre, because it's less to wrap your head around effectively, and it's less of a commitment. You already know the real world, and that real world is Yale University in a dark, sick, twisted secret societies within Yale, which are sort of drawing from real elements of Yale, but definitely not the fantastical, not the sick, dark, and twisted. That's just a totally unique spin on it for this book. Dark academia, and this is a really fun, gritty read. So if you like darker themes, and there are plenty of darker themes within this book, Ninth House might be a really good starting point for you. All right, next up, we're going in a completely different direction for those who want a no strings attached, completely fun, light-hearted, not to be taken too seriously adventure ride with a lot of humor and banter. Look no further than the Banned series by Nicholas Eames, The Kings of the Wild and Bloody Rose. Now, only 2 books from this series have been released at the moment, and that can be a really positive thing for a new reader, because if you love the first one, you can get straight into the second one, and then while he's writing the next ones and releasing them, you can start reading other things in fantasy that are the same or really different, whet your taste buds a little bit, and then come back to it when he releases the new book. That can be a really nice plus for a new reader. Now, these books really are just a totally fun ride, and they're not meant to be taken too seriously. The first one especially, that is about as lighthearted as anything. It is full of banter, full of wit, full of jokes and humor, both appropriate, inappropriate. There's puns. Fantastic writing. The second book is pretty similar in that way, except it tends to be a little bit more, a bit deeper. The characters have a bit more depth. They have a little bit more going on, more serious issues to overcome and deal with. It does grow as a series, but you will know after the first one whether it's something you want to continue. Fun ride. I don't need to say anything else about it. Now, for those of you who want to dig their heels into a more developed story, a more developed series, then Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson is another beautiful way to start. And don't worry, this is my last Brandon Sanderson recommendation, but he is the king of fantasy, and he writes in such a way that's so accessible, it's so easy to understand. It almost feels like you're not even reading these books, you're kind of just in these worlds that he's creating. His magic systems are just breathtaking. He is the king of easy to get your head around fantasy, and a perfect entry point is Mistborn. Now, Mistborn is amazing because it's not too big of a series. It follows a fairly small cast of characters that are super, super memorable. I remember all of them, and I read this book about a year ago. I remember almost every detail of this book. It was that good. And the magic system in this book is the best I've read by far. I don't even know how he possibly came up with it. It's so well executed, and even though it's a fairly complex magic system, it is so easy to understand and interpret because of Brandon Sanderson's writing style. He brings you right into this story and writes it in such a way that is so easy to follow along. No matter how good or bad you are at reading fantasy, it ain't gonna matter. This is gonna be an absolute banger first book. And just thinking about it now, I don't even think I've spoken to one person who didn't love Mistborn. The entire trilogy is just that good, and it actually showed me how much of an impact magic can have on a story. I didn't realize how much a good magic system could elevate a story, but let me tell you, this book did just that. All right, my next suggestion is for people who still want a series, but something a bit grittier, something a little bit more fantastical. And for those people, I recommend The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski. I really don't know how to pronounce his name, but you'll see it in the picture. One of the best things about the Witcher series, specifically for beginner readers, especially in fantasy, is that it has 5 books in the series, but before you dive into the main series, there's 2 books of short stories that you can really dig your teeth into and see if it's a series that you want to continue with. A really, really nice taste tester. Basically, the first 2 stories are just a collection of short stories within the Witcher world, within this same world, but it's gonna give you an idea of whether it's something you actually want to continue with. You can get a feel for who our characters are and what they are like ethically and morally and how they act. You get to understand the world and the monsters and the creativity and the magic, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. And then if you like that, you can continue with the rest of the series. And I'm betting that you will. Now, I'm sure you've heard of The Witcher before, considering they were famous books, famous games, and now it's actually been turned into a TV series. And it's for good reason that it's famous. This book is really fantastical, really easy to visualize. The world building is really unique. And there's so many fantastical, magical creatures and magical spells and potions. It's just a classic fantasy story. And one of the best parts about The Witcher is the characters. These characters will have you hook, line, and sinker. You'll want to know everything that happens to them and where their story arcs are headed. They just grip you and bring you in so immediately. And it holds on to that throughout the entire series, which is something that I can't say for all book series. All right, next up, we are going properly dark, sick, and twisted, and that is The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. Dead set, if you are a sick puppy and you love your characters dark and gritty and morally grey, this is the only one you have to think about. This is the one for you. Every single character in this story is so hard to work out whether they're good or bad. They're just as lovable as they are hateable, and that is an incredibly well struck balance by the author. I don't even know how he executed that, but you will love and hate all of these characters at one time or another in the story. The First Law is full of swearing and gore and guts and killing and war, and actually torture is one of the main themes of this story. We follow a character who was once tortured and is now a torturer. That is how twisted this book be at. And another really easy sell for The First Law is if you enjoy the first trilogy, he's written several more books in another series that takes place in the same world. So if you like the first trilogy, there's no reason why you won't love the rest of his works. All right, next up, we're going a completely different direction again, and we're going into horror. That's right, horror. Now, horror is a very interesting one for me because I usually find that the books are nowhere near as scary as horror movies, but that doesn't mean that they're not really fun, engaging reads. And some people, I'm sure, find them totally scary. And there is no one better in the horror genre, horror fantasy genre that I've come across than old mate Stephen King. Now, something great about Stephen King is not only has he written about 300 billion books, but most of them are set in the same universe or the multiverse. And it means that there's Easter eggs in each of his books or some of his books that connect to other books. Really, really fun adventure. So the 2 books that I actually suggest from Stephen King are The Shining and Pet Sematary, in any order that you prefer. I think I read Pet Sematary first and then The Shining, but I don't think it matters too much. They're both really different and really good. And if you've actually seen The Shining, and whether you loved it or not, don't worry, the book has enough differences that will make it a really enjoyable read, and it definitely does go in a different direction to the movie, so you'll definitely still enjoy it no matter whether you've seen it or not. And Pet Sematary goes in a different direction. This story focuses on the traumas of loss and death, and namely, what would you do to bring back someone that you love? This book is really intense. Very, very good read. Please do not watch the movie. It is a rubbish adaptation, but the book, fantastic. Very, very dark. So like I said, both of these books are fantastic. You could start either one whenever you want. The order doesn't matter. They're both really good entry books. And one last recommendation for the entire video is something that is going to come as no surprise for anybody, and that is Harry Potter. I don't need to say anything else about it. Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling is one of the most famous stories ever, and it is a great read. As a young adult, as an adult, going back for the second time, doesn't matter. It's a fantastic read, and you will definitely enjoy it if you haven't read it before. Now, just quickly before I wrap this one up, I want to say, don't worry how you start your journey. Don't let anyone tell you have to do it this way. You have to start with this series. You have to do this or that. None of that's true. No one could possibly know what the right journey for you is. These books that I've suggested today are just really easy, digestible books that I think anyone would enjoy. I know anyone would enjoy. And I think that they're a really good gateway into just getting your taste buds a bit wet. And there's a really good range that I've listed above. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. Give this video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Subscribe if you want to see more from me, and I'll catch you next time. See ya!